If you are watching this video, you might be one of billions of people today who feel like they're a failure for not being able to live up to societal expectations. Perhaps you can't get a good job, can't figure out what you want to do in life, and are being shamed relentlessly by your parents and society for being a failure and a loser. But what if you're not the loser? What if this modern society is the true loser and failure, and they're just projecting their own shortcomings onto you? This might sound like I'm just coping at first, and I'm sure a lot of people will accuse me of that in the comments. But what if I told you that there are actually a lot of facts, science, and history which prove you are not the failure here modern society is? Let's dive into it. Part 1. Modern society is a pimp, and we are its prostitutes. We've all seen the movies where pimps keep their prostitutes in line by forcibly drugging them up with highly addictive drugs and getting them addicted to a point where they can't live without it. And the only place they can get these illegal addictive drugs is their pimp. This keeps the prostitutes in a physiological form of a prison, to where the pimp doesn't even have to physically keep tabs on them to prevent them from going to the police or running away. It is a horrible and disgusting, but also a brutally effective tactic. By the way, this isn't just the movies, this is something that sadly happens all too often in real life too. A lot of the things modern society tells us we should be grateful for is much like how a pimp drugs their prostitutes. Set up a system and get you addicted to a drug that you never needed before, then tell you should be grateful that they're supplying you this drug. A great example of this is the iPhone. If you're Gen Z, your asshole boomer parents have undoubtedly used this countless times to gaslight you. You're such a spoiled, ungrateful brat. How dare you complain about society when it gave you these iPhones you can't live without now? Now, as your millennial defense lawyer, I'm not gonna let them get away with this. If you ask anyone my age, they'll tell you that life was actually way better before we had iPhones. People had more connections, more real-life friendships. Life was simpler and easier. I never needed an iPhone. I lived perfectly fine for most of my life without one. But fast forward to today, and society has created a world where you literally need to have one for just about every daily task. I know a lot of delusional boomers like to mock Gen Z as just mindlessly scrolling through social media, and they'll tell you the solution is as simple as just putting down the damn phone. But this is just more simple-minded boomer delusion. iPhones are not just for scrolling cute cat videos on TikTok anymore. Literally everything from your bank account to your communication with the outside world goes through an iPhone now. Trust me, as a 90s kid, I love more than anything to just call a friend through a landline to set up plans. But how exactly would I do that when nobody uses a landline anymore? I love more than anything to just go to a Blockbuster, rent out a physical DVD with a group of friends, and have just one more epic 90s movies night. But how exactly would I do that when Blockbuster literally doesn't even exist anymore? It's been phased out by modern technology, by modern society. Just like a pimp does with a prostitute, society gets us addicted to a drug and then tells us we should be grateful for it. I'm sure somebody is going to point out in the comments, oh look, a YouTuber who makes a living off the internet is complaining about technology. How ironic. But this is the thing. Before the internet existed, before you had to apply online for literally every job, it was so easy to get a decent paying job in real life, as you didn't have to compete against all these hundreds of other applications online. When I was 11, I was able to easily land a decent summer job delivering newspapers. I didn't even have a middle school diploma yet. The internet now has essentially phased out physical newspapers, as everybody can just read online these days. And now, as a result, you have to have a PhD and apply to hundreds of jobs online before you get a single response. Perhaps my very favorite example of this is the car. Coming from an immigrant family, my parents used to always tell me, you should be grateful that we can have cars in America. But as I grew up and traveled the world, I realized just how big of a lie this is. In most other places in the world, cities are walkable, public transportation is great, and you don't even need a car to begin with. My parents always said that for them, having a car was so liberating. For me, it was the exact opposite. As soon as I left America and moved to Europe, where mostly everything is accessible by foot or public transit, this was actually the most liberating experience ever. I was liberated from car payments, gas, and insurance costs, liberated from all these excruciatingly boring long lines at the DMV. American cities have the most god-awful layouts where residential areas are completely isolated from businesses, and you have to have a car to even be able to buy food. And to top it all off, the cultural mentality there is to shame you as a loser if you don't have a car. This is literally just like how a pimp gets a prostitute physically addicted and dependent on a drug, then tells her she should be grateful he's giving her the drugs. But one day, during my travels, as I was taking a nice metro ride through Paris, a very interesting thought popped into my head. You see, this was a day where the air pollution in Paris got so bad that they actually had to restrict half of all cars from entering the city. And they also made the metro system totally free that day just to get the pollution under control. Am I the broke loser for not having a car? Or is modern society the true broke loser for creating a system so dependent on cars that we literally can't even breathe the air anymore? Hey guys, just wanted to say real quick, thank you all so much for 20,000 subscribers now. Wow, I seriously am so grateful. I have no words, like we're just growing so fast right now. It feels like just yesterday we hit 10K. So yeah, just wanted to say thanks, and if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing for more epic takedowns of all these evil corporate lies. Part 2, the biology. Gen Z has made it very clear that they don't want to work anymore, and a lot of them are in favor of universal basic income. This is something I've always felt the exact same way about since I was Gen Z's age. And as a result, I've made it my mission on this channel to defend them. And throughout all these hundreds of videos, there is now one recurring argument I always see from the other side. No one's forcing you to work, you just have to work if you want to eat. This isn't modern society or capitalism forcing you to work. This is just the laws of nature. Just look at the animal kingdom. They all have to go out and hunt too if they want to eat. And this might sound logical if your only understanding of nature comes from watching lions on the Discovery Channel. But if you do even a bit of actual biological research, you'll see that the lie detector test determined that that was a lie. The capybara is an animal native to many parts of South America. They live in lush biomes near forests, wetlands, and savannas, which are teeming with abundant and essentially infinite free food sources in the form of vegetation. And as a result, they never have to hunt or work a single day in their lives. The argument that we should be forced to work because nothing is free, not even in nature, is just objectively false. This argument only really applies to carnivores. Most herbivores, however, have free food sources that grow abundantly in nature. This is why a lot of farmers like having goats and cows, as they can just eat the grass on the ground that grows for free, and you don't even have to buy food to feed them. But wait, herbivores and other prey animals live short, dangerous lives, don't they? They're always on the run from predators, so this is their form of work, and thus the capitalist laws of nature still apply, right? Actually, no. You see, our good friends the capybaras have a very simple way around this. They are excellent swimmers and like to live near lakes and other bodies of water, and thus, anytime a predator comes around, all they have to do is go for a quick dip and they're safe. Most herbivore prey animals have a very large discrepancy between their lifespan in the wild versus their lifespan in captivity, which reflects the fact that they have to do a lot of work just to survive. But capybaras, their average lifespan in captivity is about 12 years. In the wild, 10 years. Not that far off at all. I'd way rather lose 2 years at the end of my life when I'm too old to really enjoy it anyways than modern society's deal of losing 65 years to a miserable job I hate just to maybe get 15 years of retirement when I'll be too old to enjoy it anyways. And capybaras are not the only animals who don't have to work. Sloths, for example, simply eat leaves from the trees they live in. Their food source is freely and abundantly available. They don't have to go out and hunt at all. They sleep up to 20 hours per day and move very slowly to conserve energy. They blend in so well with the canopy that they essentially have no natural predators. A Galapagos tortoise freely eats abundantly available sources of grass and leaves all around it. It moves very slowly to conserve energy, and as a result, can go up to a year without food or water. It has no real predators in nature, as its impenetrable shell makes it impossible for predators to break. And to top it all off, they can live to be over 100 years old without ever having to work. Now, if you do a quick Google search on Galapagos tortoises, you'll see that this species is in serious danger of going extinct. How can this be the case if they have no natural predators? Well, it turns out they do have one new predator that's forcing them to work for their survival. The same predator that's forcing you to work for your survival. Capitalism. In the 17 and 1800s, sailors and pirates captured many tortoises for food. Why? Because their ability to survive months without needing food or water made them ideal for long ship journeys. Human society has also introduced many new animals to the island ecosystem that have been absolutely devastating for the Galapagos tortoise. Cats, rats, and dogs like to feed on eggs and young hatchlings. Pigs and goats eat the vegetation that used to belong to the tortoise. And so, yes, today, the tortoise is indeed fighting tooth and nail for its very survival. But as you can see, it wasn't nature that did this. It was modern society. Modern society first took away your ability to access free resources, and now shames you for being lazy, for not wanting to work for resources that were free to begin with. Now, I know what you're thinking by now. Human biology is different. We don't have the ability to eat grass all day like capybaras, sleep 20 hours like sloths, or go a full year without food like a Galapagos tortoise. We still have to work because humans don't have natural access to free resources, right? Or what if we did, and that got taken away from you by modern society too? Part 3. The Anthropology. Marshall Solins was a well-respected American cultural anthropologist with a PhD from Columbia University. One day, he was studying research done on the Kung tribe from fellow anthropologist Richard B. Lee when he made some very fascinating discoveries. The Kung are a hunter-gatherer tribe that have lived for thousands of years in the Kalahari Desert. Looks can be deceiving, and the Kalahari Desert isn't your average barren wasteland desert. It's teeming with tubers, wild melons, and over 100 edible plant species, most notably the mongogo nut, which grows in abundance there. Richard B. Lee personally visited and conducted extensive field research with the Kung tribe, and what he discovered was very surprising. They only had to work about 4 to 6 hours per day, 2 to 3 days per week. This is confirmed by Sebastian Younger, who found that the Kung only had to work about 12 hours per week to survive. They also found out that Kung tribes had surprisingly good health. Like most primitive tribes, infant mortality rates were high, but if you managed to make it to adulthood, your lifespan wasn't that far off from what it'd be in modern society. They also had surprisingly good teeth, despite no modern dental care. This is because their diet is totally free from sugar and processed foods. Once again, modern society forcibly gets you addicted to a drug, then calls you lazy for not wanting to work for the cure. Now let's take a minute to quickly clarify a few things here. Am I saying the solution is for all of us to return to being hunter-gatherer tribes? Of course not. Seeing these pictures of the Kung, it's clear they're not living in some utopian paradise. And to be fair, capitalism has given us a lot of the comforts we enjoy in modern life as well. Solins obviously wasn't arguing that we were more affluent on a pure GDP basis, but that they were able to meet their basic survival needs on far less work than modern Gen Z and millennials in the West. Yes, if you're exceptionally naturally talented or born to rich parents, you're obviously going to have a much better life in the West. But when it comes to meeting basic survival needs, this is where the Kung win. Consider that with these insane rising food prices, the average Gen Z or millennial probably has to work 60 hours a week just to not starve to death. The Kung, on the other hand, are able to do this in just 12 hours. Now, again, does this mean that the average life of a young person living in the West is worse than that of a Kung? Absolutely not. But there is a rapidly increasing percentage of young people who are going homeless and hungry on the streets right now. And I can't say that a young homeless kid on the streets lives that much better than the Kung. It's not that our overall quality of life is worse than theirs. It's that we have to work so much more just to survive. Once again, I'm not making the case that we should all go back to living like hunter-gatherer tribes. If you want to be a hardcore capitalist, work 80 hours a week, and buy a bunch of fancy cars and houses, trust me, I promise you, I won't stop you. Go right ahead, more power to you. I'm simply making the case that just like we have the right to pursue a life of riches without being criticized for it, we should also have the right to be unemployed and live a minimalist lifestyle without being criticized for it. Okay, so where does this all lead us? Well, back to where we started with universal basic income. Okay, let me take a quick, deep breath here and try and be a little more mature about this issue than I typically am. I've noticed every time I bring up the UBI conversation, people become very stubborn on both sides of the argument. People who are against it call me a communist, then I turn around and call them a corporate shill. It feels good to temporarily own them at the moment, but in the end, nothing gets accomplished. Those who already agree with me even more, and those who disagree with me end up hating me even more. It just feeds this nonstop echo chamber issue we see all over social media now. So I'm going to instead extend an olive branch to everyone who might disagree with me on this and just ask you to listen with an open mind for the next few minutes. I understand your frustration. I really do. We are all struggling in this economy right now, and it can be very frustrating to feel like you're working hard only to pay taxes for people who don't want to work. But this is exactly what corporations want. They want us to hate and resent each other, and we're playing right into their hands. Corporations want you to feel like UBI means giving away your own hard-earned tax dollars to lazy people who don't want to work. But as I just proved, this isn't the case at all. It's more about giving everyone back a share of the free resources of the earth that governments and corporations forcibly took away from us. Keep in mind that universal basic income means basic only. Basic living expenses like food and land, which never took that much work to begin with. It only takes a lot of work now because modern society made it that way. Now, of course, if you want luxuries, you should have to work and pay for those. No one's ever debated that. But basic survival needs such as land and food, those existed in abundance all over the world for free long before society even existed. I once again want to reiterate that nobody is saying we should all be hunters and foragers again. We're simply pointing out the fact that this idea that nothing is free, nature itself is capitalist, and that we'd all have to work to survive anyways, is just a total capitalist myth. Land was free to create and existed for billions of years before society did. Food sources were free to create and existed for billions of years before society did. I'm sure somebody in the comments is going to be like, well, if you hate society so much, just go out and live in the woods then. But here's the thing. You can't. You literally, legally can't. The government legally owns all the land on the earth, and they'll force you back into society if you try to live in the wild. This has actually happened to many people who have tried. It's a bit ironic how the same people who claim nothing is free somehow magically decided that the government should own all the land for free, even though they themselves never paid for it. Before society existed, you could just move onto any plot of land you discovered for free. But now the government took all of the land for free themselves and put it behind a paywall. Before society existed, the land was full of natural food sources like fruits, berries, and tubers. But they've all been run over and destroyed to make cities over. So, since society took away your ability to access free resources in the first place, they morally owe you a universal basic income, telling you that you have to work because nothing is free when they're the ones who seized and destroyed all the free resources in the first place is literally like a pimp forcibly drugging up a prostitute against her will and then telling her she's lazy for not wanting to work and pay for the drugs. Chapter 4. The History. To be completely fair, rich biomes like the Kalahari Desert are the exception and not the rule in nature. So, is there a case to be made that those of us not born in naturally rich ecosystems like the Kalahari Desert are also entitled to resources like land and food? Well, actually, yes. Perhaps the only time in history where working conditions are worse than they are today is the Industrial Revolution. People worked long, hard 12 to 16-hour shifts, got paid next to nothing, and were often injured or even killed because factory working conditions were just so horrific. When you see just how horrible these working conditions were, you can't help but ask yourself, why would anyone willingly agree to this life? The answer is they didn't. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, people had access to communal farming areas where they could freely grow crops to feed themselves without having to own the land. Now, you might picture farm work as being very manually labor intensive. And that's certainly the case today, as modern farmers are under pressure to produce capitalist profits just like the rest of us. Less than 2% of the population are farmers today, which means they have to work significantly harder to feed the rest of us. Farming in the past, however, was a very different story. Once you remove the burden to produce capitalist profits, the workload becomes much lighter. Medieval farmer, for example, had anywhere between 100 to 150 days holidays per year. Now, every time I bring up this point, there's always a false counterpoint people bring up in the comments. This isn't true. This only counts days they had to work for the Lord, but they still had to work for themselves on the other days. This is just not a very good argument because people today still have to work for themselves outside of working for their boss as well. Most of us in this economy are not rich enough that we can afford to hire a maid to do all the cooking, cleaning, and housework for us. We still have to do it ourselves. In fact, you could easily make the argument that if you're going to count work outside of official hours working for your boss or lord, people today are even far busier than medieval peasants were. Most jobs today, especially for Gen Z, do not pay enough for a living on their own, and those people are scrambling to do 2 to 3 extra jobs, 2 to 3 extra side hustles, not to mention all the unpaid time commuting to and back from work that a medieval peasant who lived on the same farm he worked at didn't have to go through. Now, again, to be fair, being a farmer in 1500 was not a utopian paradise, but it was undoubtedly far better than these horrific Industrial Revolution era factory conditions. So why would anyone willingly choose to do this? Well, they didn't. They were forced to. The Enclosure Acts were a series of over 5,200 acts carried out by the English government between 1604 and 1914, where they forcibly kicked off every farmer from the communal grounds that they lived on for centuries and handed them over to corporate landlords. These peasants who were forcibly displaced from their homes then had no choice but to move to nearby cities where they'd have no choice but to accept a job with horrible working conditions in an industrial revolutionary factory. You can see the pattern by now. In biology, anthropology, and history, modern society first stripped you away of your natural God-given right to access free resources like land and food. And then they call you lazy because you don't want to work for resources that were free to begin with. And this is why Gen Z is absolutely right to demand UBI as a birthright. This is why we are all entitled. Yes, entitled to it. It's not that we think we're entitled to free stuff. It's that all this stuff was free to begin with. Modern society forcibly took it away from us, put it behind a paywall, and now calls you lazy for not wanting to break your backs working 60 hours a week for it. Yes, if you want luxuries, you should have to work for those because those are not free. Other people had to work tirelessly to build cars, computers, vacation hotels, etc. But last I checked, nobody was advocating for universal luxurious income. We're simply advocating for universal basic income. And basic survival needs such as land and food existed for literally billions of years before society did. So why the hell are we working 60 hours a week to pay society for it? Hey guys, thanks so much for watching today's video. The idea that the resources of the earth were free to create and thus we're all entitled to universal basic income is part of a wider and very interesting lost political ideology known as geolibertarianism. We explore this concept in much further detail in this video right here. If you like this video, I'm sure you're going to love this one as well. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you there.